Hi all, welcome to MeDIDa, a podcast analysing all sorts of media about multiplicity and dissociative identity disorder. We're talking books, movies, television, gaming, and more. Whether it's overt or covert, intentional or unintentional, I want to talk about it. I'm your podcast host, Avodacat. I am a fully fused-ish system, which means that my multiplicity, for the most part, is no longer compartmentalized, and I'm constantly intrigued by the way that media that isn't intentionally representing plurality almost always does a better job of it compared to media that's actively setting out to represent it explicitly. This podcast is not necessarily a place that is here to educate about DID, multiplicity, and plurality. If you want educational content about it, there are several places you can find that, both online and offline. This here, though, is specifically a place to review and analyze media. So if you, like me, have opinions on things, stick around and join in the discussion. This podcast is recorded on Kaurna country, and I extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the land and the elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. This is still stolen land without any Indigenous treaty. The land I am on impacts how I go about my day-to-day life, including my media analysis, so this acknowledgement of country is very important to what I do here. Before we get into today's discussion, I have to make a formal apology. Recently, someone pointed out that I was using ableist language in my review of Petals of a Rose, specifically when I described the actions of alters communicating out loud as erratic behaviour, and implied that showing this behaviour was further stigmatizing DID. The comment pointed out that the behaviour that I labelled as erratic was actually harmless behaviour, and that labelling it erratic was further creating dangerous stigma around it. This commenter was absolutely correct to point this out, and I am deeply sorry for making the comment and for the pain that it has caused. In the future, I will be more careful with my word choices, and I hope that you can all forgive me, because I am still learning. Being disabled does not mean that I cannot be ableist. Ableism is a systemic issue. We are all impacted by it, and are all taught it through systemic ways. Unlearning it is a process. I thank you all for your patience and understanding as we learn and grow. Today, we will be discussing Jack Stauber's Opal, a short film created by Jack Stauber and aired on Adult Swim in 2020. You may be somewhat familiar with Jack Stauber's work, as he has been uploading his songs and videos that are a mix of animation, stop-motion claymation, and live action for over 10 years, and his song Buttercup has gained significant popularity. Opal is one of two short films that Jack Stauber created for Adult Swim, the other being Shop, a pop opera in 2019. Like Shop, Opal is a musical short, with songs holding significant meaning within the story, and it also contains multiple styles of animation, although it is largely stop-motion claymation. Opal is genuinely my favourite Jack Stauber creation. Many of Stauber's creative projects have this blend of cute and creepy that I absolutely adore. It is totally my vibe. And he also has a more unconventional stylistic approach to his art that reminds me a lot of Klasky Schuper cartoons from the 90s. And his music also has a reasonable amount of retro inspiration to it. It's all very nostalgic in a creepy, cute way, which I love. In a lot of ways, Opal is a culmination of everything Jack Stauber has previously done, while also being a bit of a deviation from those things by centering the story explicitly on a child experiencing abuse and neglect. Stauber has not necessarily shied away from those heavier content matters previously, but a lot of it was a little bit more vague and up for interpretation previously. But depending on the interpretation of the individual, some may even say that the majority of Stauber's work focuses on darker subjects, but it's often dressed up in layers of bright colours and absurdity, whereas Opal is explicitly much more grounded and darker, even in its more absurd moments. Additionally, Opal is 12.5 minutes long, and while that is relatively short for a film, the majority of Stauber's work ranges from the 30 seconds to 3-minute mark, so 12 minutes is a rather lengthy piece, comparatively. I would highly recommend you check out Jack Stauber's Opal before listening to the rest of this episode. Genuinely, it won't take you very long, and if you enjoy it, then I would recommend you check out some of Stauber's other works too. It is a quite intense piece. While it doesn't directly depict any on-screen abuse, there is definitely references to abuse. There's very obvious signs of neglect towards the child character, and there is also a short moment where she is restrained. as well as the overarching tense and suffocating mood to the whole piece that can be really difficult to sit in. So I will caution those who are interested to prioritize their safety when engaging. If you choose not to watch it, I will hopefully, almost definitely, be providing enough context for you to understand the discussion anyway. And I will also, in this discussion, be discussing the abuse and neglect in more detail, as well as briefly touching on some of the religious symbolism in the short. So please proceed with caution in both checking out the short film as well as this podcast episode. A further content warning regarding discussions of blood, disfigurement, drugs, and alcohol, all of which are present in Opal. First off, it's important to note that Opal is not directly or explicitly trying to be about DID or multiplicity. In fact, many people have discussed and analysed this short, and everyone that I've seen has been able to clearly see the themes of child abuse and neglect in the story, but I have never once heard somebody talk about it in terms of structural dissociation, even though to me it seems relatively obvious. If you have heard other people's takes on this film in terms of structural dissociation, I would love to hear it, because I do think it is an amazing example of how and why structural dissociation and dissociative identity disorder forms. I'm going to be taking a different approach to my discussion on Opal than I usually do. Where I would normally discuss how a piece of media portrays the ideal multiplicity by focusing on specific moments or actions, this is going to be a more in-depth and minute look at this short, going through every small detail and how ultimately it adds evidence towards my theory that this short is in fact showing the early stages of structural dissociation and the development of DID. Because of how intentional every choice in this short is, I think that it is important to take this more zoomed in and minute, in-depth look at the short. Before I jump into that analysis, though, I will give you a short synopsis so that if you do not want to watch the short, you have a base framework that we can build off of to discuss the finer details. Opal tells the story of a girl who has a mother, a father, and a grandfather who all appear to adore her. While they warn her not to think about the house across the street, Opal feels drawn to it, specifically the haunting attic window, and sneaks out to investigate. Upon entering the house, she comes across an old man who seems to be blind, who calls her Claire, and asks her to get his cigarettes, before launching into a song called Easy to Breathe, asking why it sounds so easy for people to breathe on TV. After the song, the man realizes Opal is not Claire, and lunges at her, chasing her up the stairs. As she makes her way down the hall, she is stopped by a man whose face is obscured by a mirror. He also calls her Claire, and begins talking about his own beauty, launching into a song called Mirror Man. However, the old man continues to chase Opal up the stairs, and Opal continues to flee into the house, causing the Mirror Man distress for leaving him. Opal escapes into the next room and continues to try to make her way to the attic, but is grabbed by an inebriated woman. This woman also calls her Claire and rambles about how they are both helpless victims before falling into a partial song called Virtuous Cycle. Opal manages to escape this woman too and runs the second flight of stairs up to the attic, blocking the attic door behind her. She walks towards the window and looks out to where her own house should be across the street, only to be confronted by the reality that there is no house there. Only a billboard showing an advertisement for Opal's Burgers, showing a girl and her family. Opal's family smiling back at her. This realization hits as the three people in the house begin aggressively banging on the door for Claire, and Opal is confronted by the harsh reality that she is Claire, that this is her family on the other side of the door, and that this is her reality. Unable to cope, she retreats back into her mind to a place where she can imagine a family who is kind and caring and keeping her safe. As the short comes to a close, we zoom out of Claire's mind to see her family still banging on the attic door, and then the house on the lonely street before it cuts to credits. I'm sure many of you can already see from that description what felt so immensely clear to me the first time I watched it, but indulge me as I break down this absolutely stunning piece of art and explain why I think it is some of the best representation of early stages of structural dissociation forming DID that I personally have ever seen. For the purposes of this discussion, I will be talking about Claire and Opal largely as two separate entities, although it is not clear during the short if they are fully separated structurally yet. I do think that based on context clues, there is a clear basis for stating them to at least be two separate parts, two separate alters, even at this early stage with the limited information that we have. Feel free to disagree with me, but I ask you to just hear me out on this, and let's start again from the top. So, the short opens on piano music and soft vocals in a calm but haunting melody as a shot pans across a dimly lit wooden table. This table is messy. It has a TV remote, 2 partially full glass ashtrays, a few crushed cans, a spoon, some papers, and crumbs all over it. These are real objects, not animated, that make up this scene. The area is lit by a dim blue light, similar to how a television or computer screen might light up a room if it was the only source of light available at night. This shot lasts for about 10 seconds before the music and visuals change, suddenly becoming chaotic and animated. The music tempo increases and adds background percussion, while the screen animates spinning cigarettes, television sets, and remotes for 5 seconds. The shot is then changed again, and we're back to the calmer music while the camera pans over a white table. This table is somewhat cleaner, although still messy. It is cluttered and showing several cosmetic items and a seamstress tape measure and a magnifying mirror that magnifies the tape measure as it reflects over it. There are several additional mirrors as well as brushes, chains, tweezers, and a variety of other things. The shot lasts for about 5 seconds before we again cut to the chaos with the faster tempo music and percussion. This time we have a bunch of spinning mirrors being animated. Again, this lasts for about 5 seconds before we switch back to another calm moment. This time to something that might be a bed, with sheets thrown haphazardly across it. The scene is littered with pills, empty pill bottles, and empty wine bottles. After about 5 seconds, we switch back to the chaotic tempo, and this time we have spinning pills, pill bottles, and wine bottles animated. We only get this for about 3 seconds this time before the scene changes again, although it is still chaotic. The music stays consistent. We cut through the scenes relatively quickly of wine spilling over a romance novel that is titled Serial Killer Lover by Amy Vibrator, and then a hand throwing a crumpled tissue onto a magazine called Fashion, spelled without the O, that has a really eccentric cover aesthetic. And finally, a hand stubbing out a cigarette, but on the TV program guide. The music finally returns to the calm as we see the opening titles all in white, Jack Stauber's Opal, as the black background zooms into the window in the center of the frame. As we get closer to the window, we can see through it to a small, classic suburban home with white wooden paneling. We float through the window as the title fades away, floating towards the house and landing outside it before it cuts to the next scene, which is inside the house. Okay, so I want to pause here for a moment and reflect on what we've just seen, what I've just described, talk about everything that's in this very short section. It's only been 45 seconds, but we've already seen so much. You may have already noticed that each scene motif within this opening aligns with the characters in Opal. The first one with the television and cigarettes representing the grandfather, the cosmetics and mirror represent the father, or the mirror man, and the pills and wine represent the mother. It is important to note that all of these areas are extremely messy and chaotic. There is absolutely no order in any of these adults' lives, which means by extension there is no real order in Claire or Opal's life either. Additionally, the switching between the calmer scenes to the more chaotic scenes further represents the overall chaos in this household, but at a more emotional level than just the literal decor. The music and animation are communicating that none of these adults are emotionally stable and are unpredictably volatile. It also is incredibly important to note that none of the items shown belong to Claire or Opal in these opening shots. Despite this short being called Opal, there is nothing of Opal to be seen in these opening shots. This indicates the extreme neglect that Claire and Opal live in, that she literally has nothing here that physically marks her presence. I do think that this is incredibly purposeful, not just to show that Claire and Opal are barely living in their own lives, but also showing how they came to be. This short is called Opal, and each of these shots represent how Opal came to be, how Opal came into existence as being necessary, how the segmentation, how the structural dissociation was necessary in Claire and Opal's life. It shows the reality of what made Opal come about, the neglect and abuse that literally formed her. We then get the title with the backdrop of the window, although it's barely visible in the darkness. In this shot, we are literally looking through Claire or Opal's eyes out through the attic window. Because we see Opal in the house across the street in the beginning, I am assuming that the child in the attic is Claire. So that's where we are creating our separation. Claire is the child in the attic. Opal is the child safely in the house across the street. At first, there is nothing, but as we get closer, the light through the window can be seen, and we see the house. It's important to remember that this house isn't physically present. It is something that a child's mind has created to give herself a safe place to exist. As we float out the window and down towards the house, this feels so much to me like the dissociation of entering the inner world, that gentle floating experience that many systems experience. It's my personal opinion that what we're witnessing in this moment is a split occurring. The moment where a dissociative barrier is built internally to separate identity states. I don't know if this is that moment in reality, or if it's just a moment of dissociation into the inner world, but either way, this opening to me feels like it is representing how Opal came to be as a separate entity from Claire. The next scene opens on an internal shot of the classic suburban house. A close-up on a burger sitting on a plate, and then we see a close-up of a claymation man's face. It appears to be happy, but frozen, as if waiting for something. There's a click, his eyes look directly at the camera, and his smile drops. We then see Opal for the first time, a small girl with an oval-shaped head and 2 yellow tufts of hair either side. Genuinely, her appearance is deeply reminiscent of Arnold from Hey Arnold, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. I do think that this short is really playing up the nostalgia factor here. When we first see her, her face is scrunched up as if she is shielding herself from something. As the light for the scene gently fades up, she slowly unscrunches her face. The shot then switches to behind Opal's head, showing the 3 people sitting across from her at the table. It is a classic-looking dining table room with patterned wallpaper. This just feels like a stereotypical family image. As we zoom in, though, the wallpaper, table, and chairs all fade away as these 3 people float up into a line against the black backdrop, lit by 4 overhead spotlights, as they sing, "We see you, Opal, your troubles are miles away. We see you, Opal, and in our eyes you'll stay." The backing music sounds like it's just a trumpet with an overall grainy effect to it, which almost feels like a really old classic advertisement on television. While they sing at the second verse, "We see you," the camera shows us Opal, who has the 4 overhead spotlights reflected in her giant eyes. As the trio sings "and in our eyes you'll stay," the camera zooms in on the man in the middle, zooming right into his right eye, showing a reflection of Opal into it, and then that transitions directly into Opal sitting at the dining room table. The shot goes back to the trio, who have suddenly resumed their previous places around the dining table, as if nothing happened. We then get a single shot of all 3 adults. The woman, the mother, we can assume, says, "There she is." The middle man, the father, we can assume, says, "That's my girl." And the shorter man, who appears to be the grandfather, simply says, "Hi, Opal." The shot then returns to Opal, who has the burger in front of her. She looks at it and then reaches down to touch it, as if uncertain. We get a shot of the trio watching her as the mother encourages her by saying, "Go on, you can do it." The shot then returns to Opal, who is holding the burger, and she grins, climbs onto the table, and begins to dance happily with the burger. We then get a shot of Opal holding the burger against a black background with all three parents cheering her on from all sides, with 4 spotlights overhead and a bright light beaming from somewhere behind Opal. And this shot is a direct reference to the billboard that we see at the end. So this is already setting us up for that realization very early on. We then get a shot over the top of Opal's head. It's almost from her perspective, but more of an over-the-shoulder shot, but we see her hair and the top of her eyeballs, and her hands as she dances with the burger. We see as she looks at each of the trio, who are clapping, a spotlight illuminating each one in a tunnel vision style fashion. The mother cheers, woohoo! The father says, that a girl? And once again, the grandfather simply says, hi, Opal. After passing the grandfather, Opal's focus turns to the window, revealing the dark house across the street. The music cuts with a sharp slapping sound, and Opal stops dancing immediately. All the light fades away as Opal stares out the window at the house across the street. The shot reverses on Opal, showing her in complete darkness with the attic window brightly reflected in her eyes. This shot reverses a few more times, showing the intensity growing. We see the father as well, as he watches Opal transfixed on the house and see a single bead of sweat drip down the side of his face as this back and forth is occurring. We then get a close-up of the burger as sweat drips onto it, and we can then see the father standing behind Opal when just moments before he was sitting across from her. This shot changes to a close-up of the father's face, cutting from the top of the head, placing the mouth right in the center of the shot. The father's face is dripping with sweat as he says, "What do we always say?" The shot then changes to the mother closing lace curtains in front of the window, the room becoming normally lit again and showing the white pattern of the wallpaper of the room. We then get a short musical montage against bright coloured animated backgrounds. The first is of the father against bright orange and purple animated background as he wags his finger and sings, "Don't mind the house across the street, Opal." The shot changes slightly, now including Opal in the shot against a bright blue and green animated background, as the father uses his fingers to literally spin Opal's massive eyeballs around as he continues singing, "It's not where your attention ought to be, Opal." The shot then changes. The music has stopped. We see the mother in the regular dining room again, as she pulls the burger away and says, "Gee, you're looking tired." We then get a shot of the father, who is again in the normal room, as he said, "Bedtime, kiddo." We then see Opal against the wallpaper of the dining room, as the trio says, "Good night, Opal," and the scene suddenly, without Opal moving, transforms, and she is now in bed with a blanket being pulled up over her. Okay, we're going to take a pause again to further analyze what we're seeing in this scene. Within this scene, I personally believe we are seeing the inner world and the early stages of structural dissociation and dissociative amnesia at play. Interestingly, this is the first shot we get, so as an audience, we are encouraged to believe that what we are seeing in these initial shots are the baseline for what the reality of this world is. However, the way that things behave and interact in this world are not grounded in reality for the most part. At least not the reality that most people are familiar with backgrounds suddenly changing, people teleporting and floating. Still, we can suspend our disbelief, particularly as this is a Jack Stauber film, and he often deals with absurdity in his shorts. But this is where we start our journey, and it will become the reference point to call back to as Opal explores the horrors of the dark house across the road. We will begin to question the baseline assumption that we were set up to believe at the starting point about this world. As we go on this journey through Opal, and as she also begins to question that starting point, that baseline assumption about what her normal is, and what her reality is. The trio is standing in for the family that Opal thinks she should have, that Claire thinks she should have. So Claire lives with a mother, a father, and a grandfather, but it's not the version that she believes she should have. It's not the version that anyone should have, really. So Opal has the version of the family from the billboard, or the family from the television advertisements that she sees. The song that the trio sings at the beginning is also very clearly heavily reminiscent of a TV commercial jingle, And since Claire's grandfather is always watching TV, it would make sense for that song to be inspired by a commercial. It is one of the early hints that we get that should have us questioning the reality of this picturesque world. I am not sure if I would call the trio in the White House alters or even parts, not in the form that they are currently in, but they are clearly manifested for the purposes of keeping Opal distracted from the reality of the situation happening in reality. The mother shuts the curtain, the father tells her to look away, and they collectively put her to bed to distract her from the reality of the situation. The father, in particular, seems very anxious and stressed out about the whole thing, sweating profusely, betraying this internal anxiety about what would happen if they don't protect Opal from the truth. Much has already been said in other analysis about Opal and her interaction with the burger in the scene, so I won't dwell too much on it for too long. I do think it's important to point out that she seems unfamiliar with the burger, as if she's not had this food before, and additionally she is a tiny child, particularly contrasted with the Opal child we see later on the actual billboard. It is safe to assume that Claire/Opal's family is neglecting to feed her consistently, that she is malnourished, and that is a part of the neglect and abuse that she experiences. Something that I don't see often talked about in analysis of Opal in the scene, that we also see throughout the entire short, is that Opal doesn't speak. She does not speak at all through the entire film. People talk to her or at her, and she seems to be understanding what they're saying, but she doesn't respond. She will occasionally make a sound or scream, but she never once speaks. This lack of speaking could be for a variety of reasons. For example, becoming mute or selective mutism is a relatively common trauma response for young children to exhibit. So this may simply be a trauma response at that level. I personally think that it is a trauma response that is also being compartmentalized into a part of Opal's identity because of the structural dissociation, which could potentially mean that Claire speaks while Opal does not, which I believe is later confirmed in the next scene. It could also simply be due to the fact that Opal has recently formed and has not fully developed her own independent personality and identity yet, so is yet to have found her own voice. It could also simply be a stylistic choice to show that Opal/Claire is not allowed to have a voice in her own life. She gets no say in anything that happens to her, and so she does not speak. There are so many reasons that you could read into as to why Opal doesn't speak, but I do think it is hugely important and an under-examined part of the short film. After being put to bed, we get a quick shot of the outside of the White House before returning to the shot of Opal's bed, except Opal is now gone. We see Opal's tiny feet as she sneaks through the house back to the window and opens the lace curtains. We get an exterior shot of the window as the curtains open, and see Opal's scrunched face before she opens her eyes, and once again sees the dark house attic window reflected in her eyes. We then get a few reverse shots looking at the window of the dark house, at the attic window, as we zoom in, and return shots of Opal transfixed with the windows in her eyes. As this drum roll intensifies, we zoom further in to the attic window, and the attic window opens to a cacophony of singing that sounds like wailing, while lace explodes from the window edges, reaching out impossibly. And right in the center of the window, we see only darkness where the room should be. We get a reverse shot of Opal, who clearly is distressed by this sight, her eyes now showing reflections of the 4 spotlights above the billboard again. The shot returns to the house, and the attic window closes while the wailing song continues, slightly fainter as we zoom out. And the shot returns to Opal, who still remains distressed and confused at the sight, and she thinks for a moment before making a decision. She opens the window of her house and slips out of her perfect white suburban house. We then get a shot of darkness with the 4 spotlights, and the spotlights turn off. The light of the scene gradually fades back in as we see Opal sneaking across the grass towards the dark house, stopping to take in its oppressive size. It is massive, this house. As Opal stands in front of the house, the scene suddenly becomes brightly lit from behind, and the music plays in a repetitive, ringing, alarm-like sound as Opal looks behind her and screams in a panic, a complete look of terror on her face. Acting almost completely out of instinct, she opens the front door of the dark house, slips inside, and closes the door behind her. This scene is so fascinating to me on so many levels. For one, it shows that the dissociative amnesia that needs to be created has to be so strong to be able to keep the mind safe. For example, as I said, I believe that this is an early sign of that structural dissociation, that dissociative amnesia growing. And even though Opal has got her own house, she's got her own family, she is still drawn to the reality of the situation. It is hard to get a curious mind to not be curious, to switch off like that. The complexity that the mind needs to go into to develop these splits is intense. But it's important to note that while there are, in my opinion, clear amnesic barriers between Opal and Claire, they aren't yet completed. There is still an overlap, a bleeding between. And that is something that does happen in reality for plural systems. There can be bleed over of information. There can be sharing of memories. Opal can sense Claire's distress, calling out to her, wailing for help from her room in the attic. I love how this is represented both visually and audibly through the lace pouring out of the dark window in this endless stream in all directions while the song wails on in a beautifully haunting manner. It really represents the way these emotions cannot be contained and need so desperately to be expressed, to explode out. How you can't really bottle up these feelings forever. Looking at the outpouring of emotions, Opal doesn't fully know or fully understand what's going on, but she also cannot completely ignore it. Her mind does try to get her to ignore it. We see that earlier with the way that the parents and the grandparents try to distract her, try to pull her away from the house across the street. But the distraction is basic. It is incomplete. The curtains that cover the window are lace. They're not opaque. They cannot completely cover up what is going on. Putting Opal to bed is also not a particularly good distraction for a busy, curious mind. It's clear that these mechanisms are still in the early stages of development. They haven't fully figured out yet how to block out the connection between Opal and Claire to allow Opal to remain unaware of the neglect and abuse that is going on in reality. I mean, the fact that the house is even still there at all demonstrates how limited this mechanism currently is at blocking things out. Like I said, I do think that this is showing how structural dissociation develops, how it forms, and it is not something that is easy for the brain to do. Minds are naturally curious, particularly children's minds, so distracting a child away from something that has caught their curiosity can be difficult. Completely shutting out the majority of the body's physical reality and memory can be almost impossible, and it is astounding that the mind works the way it does to be able to do that. But this child's mind has not yet mastered that skill. It is genuinely a learned skill. I do think that the 4 spotlights turning off as Opal sneaks out the window is absolutely fantastic in terms of media design. It shows that Opal is leaving this headspace. It shows that Opal is leaving the quote-unquote fantasy of the classic perfect suburban family that she has created for herself in her mind to venture back into reality. By leaving the house, she is leaving this introjected world that was built for her in her inner world based on the billboard and probably commercials from the TV for Opal's Burger. She is actively choosing to come out and engage physically with the world despite her mind trying to warn her against it. And so, as the lights turn off, she is no longer protected in the magical perfect billboard world, but in the horrors of reality. Before she can back down, she is spooked into the house by bright lights. Many people have speculated these lights were probably from a passing truck, which I think is probably plausible, although we never fully see where they're from. This flood of light triggers Opal's acute stress response, the fight or flight response, cued with the alarm-style music that plays as her face contorts, her pupils erratically oscillate between dilated and constricted, and she flights. She runs into the house to avoid the threat. It's interesting to note that we never actually learn whether this threat is a real threat. To our knowledge, the only thing that happened is a bright light illuminated the house. But for Opal, that was enough for her. That was enough of a perceived threat. Her body was triggered into an acute stress response, which demonstrates how triggered this body is physically. Because now that Opal has come out of the inner world, she is physically existing in the body with all of its stress responses, with how easily it can become triggered. In just the previous scene, Opal had no problem being the center of attention. She had no problem having a spotlight put on her, and even performing for people. But just now, being illuminated was too much for her, and that shows the difference in the physical reality versus the inner world for Opal. She still doesn't know why she's so scared, but she can feel it in her body now in a way that she didn't just moments before. So Opal enters the house, closing the door behind her, and she is now in the dark house. We see Opal, her eyes still wide from fear as she looks around the room. She's framed against the door with wallpaper that is a similar design to her own White House, a repeating pattern on a white background. But the room is much darker than the classic suburban house that she has just left. And we hear the faint sound of a TV. Opal gasps, her pupils constricting as she sees a large old man sitting on an armchair in front of the television. He hasn't yet seemed to notice her, so she tries to back away, reaching towards the door. Unfortunately, this room is littered with trash, and she steps on an empty chip packet, which crinkles under her foot. Opal freezes, and her face scrunches up in fear. She opens one eye to peek and sees the man staring back at her. We can see from the way that her face scrunches how automatic this fear response is. This body is triggered constantly, consistently. We can see the fear manifesting constantly. She opens her eyes to peek and sees the man staring back at her. At least he seems to be staring back at her, but his eyes are blocked by dark sunglasses. The man says, "Claire, is that you?" Now, it's important to note that while you and I know the ending of the story, the first-time viewer does not, and neither does Opal. In their mind, and in Opal's mind, she is an intruder in this house, and this man has mistaken her for Claire. And so, for Opal's safety, she begins playing along that she is Claire to avoid suspicion. The music begins to take on a menacing tone as we get a close-up of this man as he says, "Come here, I need you to bring me my cigarettes." We get a reverse shot over the man's shoulder, seeing Opal is still reaching for the door. She tries to take another step as the man yells out, "Hey," which causes Opal to freeze again. We get a low shot of the man, seeing his laboured breathing as he says, "Don't think about hiding them again either. I know it's you who's doing that." Opal glances back at the door, but resigns herself to getting this man cigarettes, to playing into the charade of being Claire, and slowly moves forward while the man continues to talk, saying, "You know, it's evil to help people who don't need help, Claire." We get a close-up of the man's face as he coughs, and blood splatters out of his mouth onto his chin, which he then wipes away. We then get a shot of Opal's feet walking over the dirty floor while the man says, "You're just like these people on television, Claire. You're far more interested in me than in anything you've got going on." We then see a shot of Opal's face close up as her eyes scan the ground, searching for the cigarettes while the man continues talking, although he becomes somewhat unintelligible. I don't understand what he's saying here.
How the hell this made him go, Jesus.
The man says, "Where are my cigarettes?" trailing off as the camera pans to the box of cigarettes on the floor. We get a shot of the man, his breathing more laboured, as he says, "How do they just keep going on and on without..." He then launches into the song Easy to Breathe, which is an absolute bop, honestly. Here the animation style changes and becomes a mix of partial live action and claymation, as well as blocky CGI animation. During this number, the man is joined by backup singers, who are just giant red lips on the silhouette of women's bodies, but those silhouettes are made up of television static. The lyrics to the song are, "Tell me, why does it sound so easy to breathe on TV? I can't see why it sounds so easy to breathe. I'm popular here, they all sing to me. Idea salesman, they want my soul clear, they fight over me like dogs. And the girls are singing, they dance too, I assume. They want my soul as well, I need that smoke clear, what the hell is taking you? And won't you tell me, why does it sound so easy to breathe on TV? Oh, won't you tell me, why does it sound so easy to breathe on TV? It sounds so easy." The music fades and we see a shot of the man back in the armchair and he sniffs the air. It's become apparent by this point that this man is blind and he cannot see Opal, so he cannot see the mistake that he has made by assuming that she's Claire, or at least we assume at the beginning. So it doesn't surprise first-time viewers when the man says, "You smell weird." We get a zoom in on Opal's face as the man goes on to say, "Why aren't you saying anything?" The small tingling of the alarm bell begins to play again as the man continues to sniff, suspicious of Opal. The music ramps up as the man says, You're not Claire." The shot zooms in from below the man, showing his intimidating size from Opal's perspective, as he begins to say in a panicked tone, "What are you doing in my house?" We get a close-up of Opal's shaking feet as the man yells, "Get out! Get out of this house!" She drops the cigarettes and begins to turn. We get a below view of the man again as he continues to yell, "Get out!" and lurches forward, falling out of his armchair and screaming as the alarm bells blare again as Opal's acute stress response is activated and she runs. However, Opal doesn't leave the house. Instead, she goes up the stairs, further into the house. I find this scene with the grandfather so fascinating. In retrospect, after watching it, we know that this is Claire's blind grandfather, and Claire and Opal are the same physical person. He clearly has some sort of relationship with Claire, although it is fairly strained. Claire clearly cares about her grandfather, and is scared for his health, as indicated by the fact that she has previously hid his cigarettes, and he assumes that that's what she's done again this time. However, the grandfather doesn't appreciate this care and calls it evil that she tries to help him. The irony of this happening right before a musical number where he laments that it sounds so easy to breathe on TV is apparent, as well as the fact that he coughs up blood. It is showing that Claire's concern for his health is not without reason. The song also reveals that the grandfather is incredibly paranoid and has delusions of grandeur, thinking that he's popular to the people on the television and that they want his soul and that they fight over him, despite the fact that the people on the television obviously do not know anything about him. They're on television. He at once desires to be the center of attention, but is also fearful and suspicious of it, which parallels how he expects Claire to do things for him and care for him, while also being fearful and suspicious of her motivations, calling them evil. However, the animation in this song also shows that he doesn't visualize any of the people on TV as actual people, instead just as the vague shape of a person, with himself being the only fully realized individual there. It's not a difficult leap to make to assume that these views also impact how he sees Claire as a person, and why he interacts with her as if she only exists for him to serve him. He doesn't see Claire not as a full person, and not just because he's physically blind, but because he's emotionally blind to the reality that people other than him have their own lives outside of him. The fact that the grandfather notices that Opal smells different and is acting different is noteworthy, in my opinion. On a first viewing, you may assume that this is because Opal is not Claire, and so it makes sense that they would smell different and that this blind man would eventually realize that they are different people. However, retrospectively, knowing that Opal and Claire are essentially the same physical person, and they share the same body, it becomes much more interesting that the grandfather becomes suspicious. While there are several explanations for this, such as the grandfather's paranoia, or Opal smelling differently because she has just been outside for what might have been an extended period of time. I do think that this is actually evidence that Opal is a different identity to Claire. Claire smells differently. Opal smells different to Claire. And Claire speaks back to her grandfather while Opal remains silent and doesn't say anything. These are perhaps very early signs, very early hints at this differentiated identity state that might be present within this child. I do think that the use of the TV is interesting as well, as the escapism that the grandfather finds in the television also seems to mirror the escapism that Claire/Opal is finding in the billboard advertisement. It is not unlikely that Claire spends a decent amount of time watching television with her grandfather for lack of anything else to do. We will later see in the attic that she seems to have no toys or belongings of her own, and there's definitely nothing else in the house that indicates that she has any of her own belongings. So she has likely adopted a similar escapism coping mechanism, creating this fictional family like the ones she would see on TV or on the billboard that represent the sort of family that she desires to have instead of the family that she actually has. A family where she would maybe be the center of attention in a positive way instead of the scapegoat and neglected. As Opal moves further into the house, the allure of the attic calls to her, this time from a door at the end of the hallway on the second story, where she had ran to after escaping the grandfather. The door sings its wailing song, and the lace pours out of it again, and we see Opal's eyes reflecting the windows of the attic again. This is interesting because she's not looking directly at the windows, but it is still recalling that initial imagery, that initial point of reference of what is calling to her. As she walks down the hallway, entranced by the call of the attic, someone calls out to her from the open bathroom door. Hey, you're just going to walk by without saying hello? This is the Mirror Man, Claire's father, a man almost exclusively defined by his vanity to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if his real name was Narcissus. He has also assumed that Opal is Claire. He is unable to see her as he has literally surrounded himself with mirrors, blocking his vision. He can see Opal's body, but her head is instead replaced by a mirror reflecting his own face back at him. We never get to see his face in its entirety, just small reflections from the mirror that he has suspended around him like a halo. He sits in a wheeled chair, wearing dark slacks, black shoes, and a white button-up shirt that is partially unbuttoned. It's an almost professional attire, like a businessman. Opal is confused by this sight, pulling a face as the man talks to her from behind his mirrors. The entire bathroom behind him is a dull yellow color, and if you want to get a little bit into color theory, this could be interpreted in many ways, although it is commonly associated with cowardice, which is definitely a trait that this man seems to exhibit. There's this whole one-sided dialogue that happens very quickly, but there is a lot going on that I want to describe to you fully so that you can really appreciate what's being done here. After the man says, "You're just going to walk away without saying hello," a deeper, almost demonic-sounding voice says, "Look at me," before the father's voice continues, saying, "Yeah, they're going to be kicking themselves."
Hey! Just gonna walk by without saying hello?
Look at me.
Yeah, they're going to be kicking themselves.
We get an over-the-shoulder shot from the Mirror Man's perspective, and we see his magnified and reflected face hovering over Opal's small body, and he gasps, saying, "I actually look really good in that," referring to Opal's outfit. He follows this up with saying, "I'm glad I don't have your ankles, though." We get a close-up of the man's hands as he flicks his wrists aimlessly back and forth, saying, Nothing against them. I just, never mind, sorry, my brain." We get another close-up of a small rectangular mirror showing the man's mouth upside down as the demonic voice comes in again saying, "Fix it." The man quickly adjusts this mirror down, and the mouth flips to an upright position as he continues talking. "I often find myself at wit's end in here," he says. The camera returns to the front angle, showing the man's full body with his face again blocked as he continues. "It's just part of my journey, you know. I'm like a tiny growing thing. I mean, my skin is... As he says this, the close-up of the rectangular mirror with the upside-down mouth appears again, and the demonic voice continues, "So dreadful." The mirror is then adjusted down again, the smile turning upright as the normal voice proceeds sometimes. We return to a full body shot, the face blocked by the mirror as the man continues speaking. "But what? You could just hold me in the palm of your hand." We get a sudden shot of the rectangular mirror being readjusted, showing Opal's legs walking away and the demonic voice saying, "Hold on a second." We get a shot of Opal, who is startled, her eyes wide, her hair shooting straight up as she's been caught, and the man continues in his normal voice, as if nothing happened. "You could spare me a little time." The shot returns to the full body shot of the man, the mirror blocking his face, and the man says, "You know, you act like I'm a complete stranger." We get a partial over-the-shoulder shot of the mirror, showing part of the man's face as violins play a tense note, and the man says, "Wait." In this moment, the audience feels like this is maybe going to be a repeat of the earlier scene, where the grandfather recognized that Opal wasn't Claire, now playing out with this mirror man. The violins continue as we get a whole body shot, and the man reaches out to the mirror directly in front of him, as if about to move the obstruction to see the truth. The camera zooms in, the background blackens, the danger of the reveal is just moments away, and then the shot returns to over the shoulder, and the man makes a minor adjustment, not actually moving it, and does not reveal Opal. The moment passes, a gentle xylophone sound tune picks up, and the danger of the moment has passed, and the man continues his monologue. "Everybody's so mad at me. Like, I'm growing, though. Like, why be so negative? Why do people look at me like the way you probably are right now?" he says. We return to the reverse full-body shot with his face blocked by the mirror as he continues, saying, "You want to know why I get so worked up? I'll just tell you." The shot then changes to the tape player as the Mirror Man's hand presses play, and the song Mirror Man begins. The graphics of the song really utilize the mirror mechanics, often showing close-up reflections of things like lips or hands or eyes, as well as direct close-ups of parts of the skin, still specifically refusing to show the whole man in his entirety. Like the previous song, it largely uses CGI for part of the animation, but it also uses a lot of stop-motion claymation as well as live action for sections of it. It's a very mixed medium music video. The lyrics of the song are, "They turn me down, now I live my nightmare. Gotta be seen by someone out there. Now I sit here in reflection chamber, fixing myself so that all can savor. Follow me, I'm on the brink of visual epiphany. Life is a costume away, oh life's a wardrobe change. So I can shift, create a rift with beauty and with grin. Blush sensation creates the foundation, God is in my skin. They turn me down, now I live my nightmare. Gotta be seen by someone out there. Now I sit here in reflection chamber, crafting the world its next new savior." The song ends on a CGI image of the Mirror Man ascending into a bright light as his halo of mirrors flap like wings to lift him up. Much of the Mirror Man is referencing Christian religious imagery here. This song is also just my personal favorite of the shot. I think it's amazing, and it's doing so much interesting stuff here. It's spectacular. After the song is finished, we return to the full body shot of the Mirror Man as he continues to speak, saying, "I don't really see why we always have to talk about these sorts of things. However, our attention as the viewer is distracted from the Mirror Man as a new point of view shot is present of someone coming up the stairs approaching Opal from behind. We get a close-up shot of Opal looking towards the noise as the Mirror Man continues saying, "But you know, it puts things into perspective for you, I'm sure." We get a shot of the blind man climbing the stairs, letting out a scream as he does so, and the alarm bells start ringing again. The Mirror Man lurches forward as Opal runs away. We get several close-ups of the Mirror Man's hands fumbling at the mirrors as, in a desperate tone, he says, "Hey, where are you going?" He knocks off a mirror, and it hits the floor and shatters, the mirror reflecting fragments of his face as he says, "You know how this makes me feel." Opal turns and runs further into the house, We see a close-up of her arm as she closes the door between her and both the blind man and the mirror man. So, a lot has happened there in such an incredibly short period of time. I've already briefly brought up the narcissism of the mirror man, as well as the heavy religious symbolism in the section. The mirror man truly believes himself to be divine in some way, with the lines of the song such as God is in my skin and calling himself the world's savior. Additionally, we never directly see his face, which is a reference to how the Christian God's face is unable to be directly viewed by people without them dying. These references show the father's assumed place of authority. He is the perfect being that rules over the household. But there is also evidently some darkness in him, as indicated by the upside-down mouth, the deeper demonic voice that is present in this scene. This is particularly interesting considering the abuse implications in the household. A lot of people really like to hyper-analyze the lyrics specifically, and even though this is a more detailed analysis of this media than we would normally do on the podcast, I'm not going to go into some in-depth analysis on the lyrics. I think that they largely speak for themselves and are pretty self-explanatory in terms of the father's narcissism. I will be bringing some attention to the first line that gets repeated, "They turn me down, now I live my nightmare." Many people have speculated on who the they are in this song, but honestly, I feel like the specifics of who they are doesn't really matter. I don't think it even really matters to the mirror man himself, really. It's not who specifically turns him down, it's the fact that anyone would deign to turn him down. It may not even be literally either, it may just be a perceived rejection that he is experiencing here. I am not an expert, but to my knowledge, it is not uncommon for people with narcissistic tendencies to believe that they are the rightful center of attention in everyone's lives, which means that people not paying them their full attention can be perceived as a slight, as being rejected and turned down. He also hides his inflated ego behind a faux mask of humbleness, calling himself a small growing thing and saying, "I don't know why we always have to talk about this," regarding a topic he exclusively brought up and conversed with only himself about. He is the only one saying anything here. Now, many of the people who've analysed Opal that I've seen have almost exclusively placed the blame of abuse on the mother, who we will discuss next, and she does have her share of blame in this. But when they discuss the mirror man specifically, the father, they frame him as a victim to the mother's abuse. And to me, this is missing a lot of the nuance and ignoring some really obvious and apparent signals from the mirror man. While it may be true that the mother is abusive towards the father, acting as if the father is solely the victim and not perpetuating the abusive cycle in any way is really ignoring a lot of nuance here, and also ignoring very blatant ways that the mirror man shows neglect and abusive tendencies towards Claire and Opal specifically. Additionally, much of this evidence of the idea that the mother is abusive to the father comes from the chaotic scene in the mother's song, which to me is not cohesive enough to say anything definitive there, as well as the mirror man's disfigured face shown in a very short clip towards the end of the short. Considering the mirror man's obsession, to me, it's not outside the realm of possibility that this disfigurement is actually a result of self-harm caused in the pursuit of perfection. While it being caused by abusive actions from the mother is not outside the realm of possibility as the cause, I don't think we nearly have enough evidence for people to definitively be saying that it is definitely caused by the mother's abuse and that the father is a victim here. I don't think that knowing for certain the way that the mirror man became disfigured or like this is nearly as important to the short as how the current state and his behaviors impact Claire and Opal. I know it's common to throw around terms such as narcissism these days, but the mirror man is undeniably a narcissist with how self-preoccupied he is, and the expectation for everyone else to be equally preoccupied with him. I'm not saying that he would be definitely diagnosed with something like narcissistic personality disorder, but that the self-obsession can essentially be classed as narcissistic tendencies. It is important to note that having narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic personality disorder does not inherently make you abusive. However, the behaviors exhibited by the mirror man can be classed as both narcissistic tendencies and abusive. This is just a word to describe the behavior of this level of self-obsession and this idea that he believes everybody else should be equally as obsessed with him. The way this attitude exhibits in neglectful and abusive behaviors can sometimes be more emotional rather than physical, which we do see examples of here, even if just briefly. For example, the comment that the mirror man gives to Opal, who he believes to be Claire, saying, "I'm glad I don't have your ankles." That one really hit me hard. I've heard things like that before. I'm sure I'm not the only one who, when they heard that, felt it deep inside them. It is not unusual for abusive parents to comment on your body as a way to manipulate and control you. And I believe that that is what is being shown here. I definitely don't think that the possibility of physical abuse is off the table at all, particularly with the way that the deeper demonic voice will often interject. It does indicate that there is a level of unpredictability here and aggression in his behavior. I think something that's interesting to note is the way that the mirror man literally never stops talking long enough to let Opal or Claire say anything, but instead makes assumptions about her, about what she's thinking and how she's looking at him, without actually taking a second to confirm any of these assumptions. He's so self-obsessed that he doesn't even have the expected realization moment that Opal is not Claire, that we are expecting based on the previous scene, because he is simply just too self-preoccupied to properly check that who he thinks he is talking to is actually who he's talking to, because he is so self-important that if he believes something to be true, then it must be true to him. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If he believes it to be true, it is true in his reality. As I said earlier, Opal not speaking seems to make her distinct from Claire, as noticed by the grandfather, the blind man, earlier, and it is perhaps a specific response to the sort of behavior from the conditioning of the mirror man, because he does not let her speak. There's also an interesting parallel that Opal, within her internal world, also represents the central point of attention in the way that the mirror man is requesting and demanding to be the central point of attention in this reality. In a lot of ways, Opal as a differentiated part is emulating the example given to her by the mirror man, by this father figure, of what it might look like to be the center of attention, because she doesn't have any healthy examples of what it would look like. She has never been demonstrated what it's like to be a part of a community where someone is not constantly demanding to be the center of attention, and so she emulates what she does see, because it's the only example she has. Well, that and the television, which, as we discussed earlier, being a potential influence in the formation of Opal's personality, the advertisements and television shows and sitcoms that represent family dynamics probably don't do the best job showing that sort of healthy dynamic either. This man is, without a doubt, abusive and neglectful towards Claire and Opal. He only acknowledges her existence as a means to gain attention for himself. When she leaves, he notices it because of the way it makes him feel, and the blame is on her because she knows how it makes him feel. Claire is responsible for his feelings, responsible for supporting him. This man is abusive. Once Opal is out of reach of the mirror man, closing the door behind her, the alarm bells stop and it is calm again. She is no longer in that highly triggered fight or flight response stage. She looks at the messy room ahead of her, which looks like a bunch of sheets thrown over furniture, and the room has a white floral patterned wallpaper. Opal's eyes land on the staircase that leads up to the attic, and a shot of her face shows again the attic windows reflected in her eyes. The call of the attic is still pulling her deeper into this house. She walks towards it, and a hand suddenly grabs her from beneath the sheet. The alarm bells stop blaring again as she is dragged down to the ground, and a woman slowly rises up, towering over her. We get a close-up of the woman's eyes as she speaks in a slurred voice, asking, "Who's that?" We get a shot from the woman's perspective, seeing her floaty double vision as she questions again. "Claire?" Again, we have another person identifying the girl we know to be Opal as Claire. In an initial viewing, there is plenty of plausible deniability in all three of these interactions, as the three adults are not fully seeing who this is. The first man was blind, the second man never looked directly at her, and this woman is too inebriated to really see her. We get a shot from Opal's perspective of the woman's face, as discordant music plays, and she continues to talk, saying, "You being a person today, huh? Goodness exists. If I wait, Claire, if I sit still, it will arrive." As the woman says this, we get a shot of her hand grasped tightly on Opal's leg as Opal struggles to free herself from the woman. The shot returns to the woman's face, who has a very serene expression as she's talking, saying, "You should be more considerate. Obviously, but I forgive you. I forgive every single one of you, every night. It's a virtuous cycle."
It's a virtuous cycle.
We get a shot from the point of view of the woman again, looking around the room with her floaty double vision as she continues saying, "How did it get so bad?" We switch to a close-up of the woman's eye and then face as she says, "I feel terrible for all of the things. I feel terrible." We see Opal's face scrunched in terror as this woman rambles at her and refuses to let go. We return to a shot of the woman glowering over Opal as she says, "You and I don't live, Claire. We survive." The woman seems to fall backwards, languishing, meanwhile her hand still gripping tightly around Opal's ankle, and she begins to sing a partial song, which is titled Virtuous Cycle. The lyrics to the song are, "Mama needs a little girl to land on. Mama needs a little girl to fall in her arms. Mama needs a mama's girl to take good care. Mama needs a baby girl to hold her hair." The music then devolves into chaos, as does the scene. The initial graphics of the song are a paper cutout silhouette style animation, but as it goes on, the more chaotic parts of the music at the end, the animation style switches to stop motion claymation as the scene of abuse seems to play out in quick, indiscernible flashes. Once the song is over, the woman continues to lay there as she says, "Our adversaries are in denial." The shot shows the mother's white nightgowned body as she pulls a bottle of wine over herself, spilling it on the ground with some splashing onto Opal as she continues, saying, "They don't know the wrong they do." The angle returns to the woman's face as she says, "And they never repent how I want them to. And you're just like me. You're as powerless as I am, Claire. See?" At the word "see," the music picks up in a more panicked tone, with violin strings coming in, and the woman lurches forward to grab Opal. At this moment, Opal is able to get free of her and run away, the wine bottle smashing on the ground as she runs up the stairs, and the woman's hand reaches after her. Opal makes it to the attic, closing the door, pushing a chair underneath the handle, immediately, automatically, almost as a reflex, as if she's done this all before. This is the part of the story where things really start to become obvious in terms of the extent of abuse in this household, as the mother seems to be the most self-aware of the reality of the house compared to the other two adults, but is also unwilling to do anything to change it. The mother basically states outright that the men in this house are abusive, although does leave out her own abusive behaviors and her own complicity in what's going on here. She talks about being helpless and powerless. It's also clear that this woman uses substances to cope, the pills and the alcohol. The mother is the most obviously physically abusive towards Claire and Opal, literally grabbing her and clearly planning to escalate to more violence to prove how weak and powerless Claire was. The way that she seems to interact with Opal/Claire and the lyrics of the song really indicate the way that this child has been parentified and neglected by this woman, by her mother. The way her mother expects the child to be relied on for emotional support, and as the person to physically look after her, when she literally makes herself sick through the substance abuse, is parentification, is emotional abuse and neglect. All aspects of this behavior point to the fact that the roles of parent and child are completely reversed here. Claire is the caretaker and the mother is taking the place of the child. This is fairly consistent throughout all of the adults in this household. They all expect Claire to be the one to look after them. They all turn to Claire, look to her for the validation they seek, while not offering any care or love or support in return. The abuse and neglect in this household at this point is undeniable. Just on a side note, we see some more heavy Christian religious symbolism here. While the Mirror Man himself is the savior, the mother seems to be more of the martyr. She talks of forgiveness and repentance, the idea that good things will come to those who wait. And the line, "they don't know the wrong they do," feels like an inebriated attempt to quote Jesus as he was dying on the cross. And he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do," which is from Luke chapter 23, verse 34, where people often misremember that as including the word wrong in it. Or there's a translation that I'm unaware of that also includes the word wrong. The woman also pulls a bottle of wine seemingly out of nowhere, which feels like a reference to the famous first miracle of Jesus where he turns water into wine. So if the Mirror Man is God and the mother is representing Jesus here, that means the grandfather finishes the Trinity as the Holy Spirit. Although we didn't really note any specific religious symbolism in the grandfather section, he does tell Claire that she is evil for trying to help him, and that the people on the TV want his soul. And since the Holy Spirit is commonly recognized within most Christian religion as a spirit that resides in the soul and guides on matters of morality, that matches the features that the grandfather exhibits. While this is not directly related to the topic of providing evidence that Opal is representing the formation of DID, I do think it's important to note, because of how prevalent Christianity often is in abusive households as a means of controlling and manipulating children, and religious trauma is relatively prevalent in DID communities. For these reasons, it felt really important to note, as this short seems to be purposefully intertwining religious symbolism into the abuse dynamics of the family. A lot of people have taken their chaotic snippets of abuse shown at the end of the song to be representative of the mother abusing the father, which they later justify when the father, the Mirror Man, has his face briefly shown and it's revealed to be disfigured. While it's possible that this has occurred, this analysis doesn't really, to me, feel representative of what we actually see, and feels relatively surface level. Particularly given the way the mother describes the state of the house, the virtuous cycle, it is more likely that the father and even the grandfather are physically abusive, or at least the aggressors in the situation. This does not mean that the mother is blameless. She is by no means blameless in this, and she fully admits to being a part of the cycle, in how she grants forgiveness every night. However, I do think that she largely omits her own complicity and participation in the abuse, particularly as it is directed towards Claire and Opal. Regardless of who exactly is the violent aggressor in the chaotic clip shown during the song, the fact that it happened at all is the important aspect in Opal and Claire's story. This household is one that is full of violence and chaos. It is a completely unsafe environment for anyone to be in, let alone a very young child in her early formative development years. Regardless of how these people are abusive towards one another, they are all abusive in some way towards Claire and by extension Opal, which is what has led to her escaping inside of her mind resorting to structural dissociation in order to cope and survive with the intense abuse and neglect that each member of the household places on her. We do not know the full extent of the abuse, we only see parts and pieces of it, but we do see how it has an immense impact. We do learn a little more about Claire in this scene, as the mother makes the comment, "You being a person today, huh?" This indicates that Claire often does not come out of her room in the attic, and honestly, why would she, given that this is her family? But it's interesting insight into the differences between Claire and Opal, although it almost does seem to contradict what we learnt earlier from the grandfather, who perceived Opal's quietness to be unusual. It is possible that Claire doesn't often interact with her family, or maybe only selectively interacts with her grandfather, but is talkative when she does choose to interact. It's also entirely possible that her family just doesn't know her at all, like, in the slightest, which is why they present contradictory ideas of who Claire is. Also, this part is probably where the audience is starting to grow doubtful of the initial reality we were presented at the beginning, of Opal being a wholly separate individual to Claire. There was much more plausible deniability with both the mirror man and the blind man because they did not directly look at Opal. While this woman sees Opal in an inebriated state, and so doesn't see her clearly, she still does get a much clearer view of Opal compared to the previous two men, and this is the woman that is Claire's mother, and she still calls her Claire. It is simply much more suspicious here, but it's still something that I feel like most people may wave away on their first watch until the following scene, in the attic. After Opal gets to the attic, automatically placing the chair in front of the door, almost as if out of habit, which is another quick and subtle indicator that Opal and Claire may be more closely connected than we initially believed, Opal looks around the attic, which is almost completely empty, with minimal furniture and blank white walls. There is the big window in the center of the wall, which Opal slowly, hesitantly approaches, and she looks around the room, seeing the bed with the white nightgown thrown onto it. It's clear that someone lives here, or at least sleeps here, but there is no real evidence of a life being lived here. There is no belongings that personalize the room in any meaningful way. There are no decorations, nothing. Even the colors are drained. It's largely just a white room. There's no patterns, there's nothing. We get a shot looking in through the window as Opal approaches it, and we see her face literally drop. Her mouth drops, her head drops, her eyes become wide and so deeply sad as she looks across the road to where her house should be. We switch to see what she is looking at, and see the billboard for Opal's Burgers lit up by 4 spotlights showing Opal's family and Opal in the center, although it is not the Opal that we have been following this whole time. It is a cute little girl who looks similar to, but different from, our Opal. So if that is Opal on the billboard, who is the girl that we've been following throughout this entire short? The knocking of the family on the door jars Opal/Claire back into reality, to the sudden realization that this is her reality. This family, this abuse, this neglect, this house, this is her reality. Opal is Claire. And as the knocking escalates and their demands get louder, we get a short series of scenes showing Claire/Opal's face in the place of her grandfather's eyes, the father's mirror, and the mother's pills. She is their coping mechanism. We get a shot of Opal screaming, her face contorting, and a white splatter seeming to come out from the back of her head, as if her mind was literally blown in this moment. She runs backwards towards the window, clutching the back of her head and falling over. The walls distort in front of her to show a face, the window representing the mouth. The music escalates into a screaming sound, and the knocking intensifies. This moment really demonstrates the extreme intensity and overwhelm of this realization and of the reality of living in an inescapably abusive household as a child. We zoom in on Opal's scrunched face, and suddenly there is calm. Dissociation has removed this child from the reality of the situation. Opal's eyes open, and she is back in her inner world. The father and the grandfather from the billboard sit across the table from her. The billboard mother closes the curtains, blocking the view of the house. The trio drift together, the wallpaper fading into the black backdrop, lit by 4 spotlights that we now know to be from the billboard, and 8 burgers surround them and spin as they sing, "We see you, Opal. Your troubles are miles away. We see you, Opal." Here, the billboard father reaches down and taps Opal's nose, and Opal's face raises from a frown into a smile. The family is now back at the table as they sing their final line, "And in our eyes, you'll stay." On the last word, the scene zooms out with Claire/Opal's hair weaving around to show that the scene is entirely in her own mind. Zooming out further, past the room showing the three adults desperately banging on the door in an attempt to be let in, and then zooming back out into the house, showing that it is the only visible house on the street, across from the billboard being the only other thing on this road, and then credits. This final scene is the cinching scene for this theory, showing that Opal is Claire, Claire is Opal. They are the same. Their realities are the same. And yet they are different people. We are taken on this journey of discovery and realization with Opal. At the beginning, she is a girl with a loving family who warned her to not investigate the house across the street, which is her mind attempting to protect her from the intense, abusive reality that she is literally physically experiencing there. As we go through the house, the evidence stacks up on how abusive this household is. But it feels like we are with Opal on a mission to rescue this Claire that we have just learnt about. This unknown child that all the adults seem to assume that she is, that they are clearly mistreating. The siren's wail of Claire that Opal heard earlier from the attic window, calling to her, asking for help. We are on this journey with Opal to try to save Claire. None of these adults are familiar to Opal. She is confused by them. She is frightened by them. She does not know what they're capable of. The fact that Opal walks through this entire house without showing any signs of recognition or acknowledgement of this place or the people in it show that Claire and Opal are two different people. We don't ever really see Claire, so to speak, despite the realization that Opal is Claire. The fact that they are two different people, we only really see Opal. We only see Opal. But we get hints as to who Claire is. We get the call from Claire to Opal for help. We get to learn about what Claire may be like from the people in her life. But Opal and Claire are two different people. They just share the same body. To me, there is very strong evidence here that Jack Stauber's Opal is really showing evidence of that early structural dissociation, the beginning stages of plurality of dissociative identity disorder. It's devastating. It is devastating to see reflected back to you the reality of your own situation, of that is what you went through to become who you are, to become the multiple that you are. It's a masterpiece, but my God, is it bleak. So that is our case for Jack Stauber's Opal. It's an absolutely masterful short of visual and sound design that construct a mystery that unravels over 12 minutes. I don't know that it's being intentionally about structural dissociation and DID, but to me the evidence is overwhelming. It is clearly and intentionally a story about childhood abuse and neglect, and to me, also the beginning stages of structural dissociation and DID. And for that reason, I am giving Opal a 4 out of 5 for multiplicity representation. It is rare that a fictional media representation can show the conditions that can create this disorder without being super explicit and gratuitous about it, because I do not feel like this was gratuitous. However, it's not explicitly about multiplicity, it's not explicitly about DID, and because of that, it's an aspect that not everybody who watches this media, who analyzes this media, ever really seems to pick up on. So it loses points to me for obscuring this. And again, I don't even know if it was purposely trying to do this, but to me the evidence really seems to be there. As much as I personally love a piece of media that doesn't hand answers to the audience, there is also a significant loss of impact when those answers that aren't there should be providing a much needed representation to marginalized groups. So that's really the only way that it loses points. It's again, impossible to know if the intention was ever really there, so I might just be reaching. But I do think that there's evidence there, and I wonder if you'll agree. So, tell me your thoughts. Have you seen Jack Stauber's Opal? What do you think? Am I right, or am I reading way too much into it? Let me know. If you have any comments or suggestions for topics to cover on MeDIDa, or if you would like to be a guest on an episode, you can contact us on MeDIDapodcast@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Avodacat, where I'll be uploading episodes as videos. You can also find us on Instagram at MeDIDa Podcast and Facebook under me.didea. I've been Avodacat, this has been MeDIDa, and it is time to switch out.